Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we focused on the actions of Michael and Rimuru. Especially noteworthy was Michael, who, after separating from Rudra to become an independent entity, began experiencing various emotions for the first time. This was also the first mention in the novel of Michael's overly simplistic emotions and lack of understanding of his skills. If Michael possessed Diablo's combat comprehension, it's hard to imagine what the final outcome would be, and the novel might change name to That Time I Reincarnated as Amanus. Nonetheless, with Michael's absolute power, the fate of Abura's phantom army was sealed, leaving Abura as the only survivor. We will delve further into this part of the story in subsequent episodes. As for Rimuru, after assessing the battlefield, he was set to face Feldway in direct combat for the first time. In this episode, we will focus on 3 battles: Rimuru vs. Feldway, Benimaru vs. Jahil, and my personal favorite, Vega vs. Ranga. Let's get started. Jahil's ultimate attack caused significant destruction, but in the final moments, it was suppressed by a mysterious force. Rimuru appeared just in time, using God of Void to consume most of the explosion and energy. This left Jahil in utter disbelief, questioning who the hell could have such power. At this moment, Feldway, who had been observing from the sidelines, finally took action. He informed Jahil that the person before them was Rimuru, the key enemy they needed to focus on. Rimuru took this brief moment to quickly analyze the battlefield. Leon was clearly under control, currently facing off against his mentor, Sylvia. This made Rimuru and Benimaru's tasks exceptionally clear: to fight Feldway and Jahil. Rimuru naturally had to take on Feldway, but the issue lay with Benimaru. The destructive power of Jahil's earlier attack had already demonstrated his formidable strength, and Rimuru was hesitant to let Benimaru face such a powerful opponent. However, before Rimuru could devise a strategy, Benimaru, as if his soul possessed by Gobda, stepped forward to challenge Jahil voluntarily. Rimuru was a bit speechless, thinking Benimaru should have at least let him come up with a plan first. Such rash behavior was quite unlike him. With the situation set, Rimuru had no choice but to step forward and choose to fight Feldway. Feldway, with a cold and arrogant demeanor, remarked that while fighting Rimuru now was unexpected, it saved him a lot of trouble if he could finish Rimuru right there. Rimuru retorted, saying that Feldway had stolen his line. Immediately, Rimuru drew the Drago blade, knowing that if they were going to fight, he had to go all out. Moreover, with Michael not present and without Michael's absolute defense, Castle Guard, it was the best opportunity to defeat Feldway. It was evident that Rimuru was unaware that Feldway could also use Lord of Justice. As mentioned in episode 85, Feldway's character is extremely cautious, or rather, overly cautious. Rimuru, too, was very cautious, but this time, not knowing that Feldway also had Castle Guard would make Rimuru's battle strategy more difficult. Now, let's watch this battle unfold. First, Rimuru's plan was to go for a one-hit kill. Yes, you heard that right, a one-hit kill. Rimuru intended to use a finishing move that every hot-blooded manga protagonist has prepared for a decisive battle: the imaginary blade. The so-called imaginary blade added the power of imaginary collapse to a sword technique, creating an unparalleled move with the help of the ultimate skill, God of Void. Let's take a moment to delve into the sword techniques in Tensura. In the Hazy style, the strongest sword technique is 100 Petals Rush, first mastered by Carrera with Ajura's help. After seeing Carrera's technique, Benimaru, through rigorous training, also mastered it. Benimaru then incorporated his ultimate skill, Lord of Shimmering Flame, Amaterasu, and further developed it into Hazy Black Flame, 100 Petals Rush. Therefore, in the Hazy style, the most technically demanding and powerful sword technique is undoubtedly Benimaru's Hazy Black Flame, 100 Petals Rush. Of course, Hinata's Mesh Slash is equally formidable, capable of severing spiritual particles. Additionally, Rudra has a supreme sword technique called Nova Break, taught to him personally by Veldonava. We will have chance to discuss about Nova Break in the future episodes, one that even could break Castle Guard. Since this technique hasn't appeared at this point in the story, we will not discuss it here for now. So, we could see that peer pressure is everywhere, and even Rimuru couldn't escape it. Thinking that he, too, should have a powerful sword technique, Rimuru sought Seal's help to develop his ultimate sword technique move. Crafted by the strongest Manas, Seal, Rimuru's technique took a different approach, not cutting spiritual particles but consuming them. Anyone struck by this technique would be transported to Rimuru's imaginary space, making it theoretically unblockable. The only defense would be to dodge it. However, there was a downside. Once experienced, the countermeasures would become evident. Just dodge it. So Rimuru reserved it as a finishing move. Rimuru also had an even stronger sword technique, imaginary collapse haze, myriad variety petals, but this move could only be used when Seal was controlling Rimuru's body, and Rimuru didn't plan to use it now. Switching back to the battle, if Feldway dared to take Rimuru's strike head-on, he would undoubtedly be doomed. However, the sound of space being forcibly distorted shattered Rimuru's expectations. Feldway intercepted the attack with his mythical weapon, Arc, leaving even Seal in astonished disbelief. Rimuru was incredulous, realizing the situation was far from favorable. Seal, shocked, remarked that the ominous hypothesis Rimuru-sama had always feared had indeed been confirmed. Rimuru nodded in agreement, wondering what this ominous hypothesis was. Seal explained it was the cliché Rimuru often mentioned, in a hot-blooded shonen manga. Whenever a finishing move was used at the start of a battle, it's bound to be blocked. Rimuru was left speechless, asking Seal to refrain from making such a spit-take comment in this serious situation. But on second thought, Rimuru realized he had always said that. Feldway's almost comical interception of Rimuru's ultimate move caused Rimuru some momentary doubt, but he quickly refocused all his attention on Feldway. It's important to clarify that Feldway actually used Castle Guard to defend against the strike. As we've mentioned, Feldway is extremely cautious and meticulous, unlike the straightforward Michael. Thus, his act of blocking with the sword was purely for show. The real defense came from Castle Guard. Although his finishing move was nullified, Rimuru maintained a facade of calm, acknowledging that Feldway indeed had some skill to block his attack. Feldway, not one to lose a verbal duel, retorted that he had expected someone capable of being Diablo's master to be more impressive, but he felt no threat from Rimuru at all. Feldway's intentionally provoking tone aimed to disrupt Rimuru's rhythm, but Rimuru remained unfazed. Nonetheless, having his meticulously practiced ultimate move nullified left Rimuru somewhat disheartened, and both he and Seal realized there was something strange about the situation. However, Mana Seal quickly reached a conclusion. Seal stated that no one could completely ignore the danger posed by Rimuru's finishing move, except perhaps someone protected by Castle Guard, like Michael. Seal surmised that Feldway likely had Castle Guard, although it couldn't be confirmed with certainty due to Feldway's deceptive act of blocking with his sword, which had successfully influenced Seal's judgment. As Rimuru analyzed Feldway during their confrontation, he realized that Feldway's swordsmanship was highly advanced. Despite Rimuru's significant physical enhancements and improved swordsmanship as a true dragon, Feldway remained composed, indicating his swordsmanship surpassed Rimuru's and was likely on par with Benimaru's. Moreover, Feldway's sword was a mythical weapon imbued with divine energy, possibly explaining why the imaginary blade was ineffective. Given that even his ultimate sword technique was nullified, Rimuru considered using Carrera's ultimate move, Abyss Annihilation, the most destructive nuclear magic. However, this spell would obliterate everything in the vicinity, making it an unusable option. Rimuru decided to maintain a steady tone and continue conversing with Feldway, seeking a way to turn the tide. Rimuru, following Feldway's previous conversation, remarked that it was only natural for him to pose no threat, as he was just a harmless slime. Feldway, somewhat speechless, commented that Rimuru's slick talk made him a perfect match for Diablo, both being shameless and thick-skinned. Rimuru retorted that being compared to Diablo wasn't something he enjoyed. Feldway replied that as long as Rimuru was unhappy, he would be quite satisfied. Rimuru initially thought Feldway would ignore his provocative words, but surprisingly, Feldway continued the conversation. Feldway appeared to be using some skill to maintain a defensive stance, with no intention of counterattacking, yet showing no signs of fatigue. As readers, we knew that Castle Guard, when used for defense, prevents the use of any other skills, so Feldway couldn't attack and could only defend in place. His act of blocking was just for show, with no actual skill involved. Naturally, Rimuru had only used the absorption ability of the imaginary collapse and wouldn't feel fatigue either, but this situation was heading towards a prolonged stalemate. The only solution was to use a sword technique that even Feldway couldn't withstand. As mentioned earlier, such a hidden move existed, but it was one that Rimuru himself couldn't control, relying entirely on Seal's full control. So, Rimuru decided to calmly assess the situation first and began observing Benimaru's battle. The battlefield between Benimaru and Jahil was engulfed in flames. Benimaru, gripping his odachi with both hands, focused intently on the fatty opponent before him. However, Jahil's speed far exceeded Benimaru's expectations. His lightning-fast movements seemed to break the constraints of time and space, appearing before Benimaru in the blink of an eye. At the same moment, a spear materialized, thrusting directly at Benimaru's vital point. Feeling a chill run down his spine, Benimaru instinctively activated the Lord of Shimmering Flame, Amaterasu, evading the attack. But Jahil relentlessly pursued, swinging his spear horizontally, intending to cleave Benimaru in two. Jahil excitedly shouted that he was going to pierce Benimaru with the mythical spear, Origin Blood, bestowed upon him by his master Twilight Valentine. Meanwhile, Benimaru, using his mythical odachi, Crimson Lotus, to block the attack, found himself in a difficult situation. Although he didn't know Jahil's exact identity, the speed and advanced spear technique that didn't match his physique clearly indicated he was a top-tier entity. Most importantly, Jahil's existence points were more than 3 times that of Benimaru, and the Origin Blood he wielded had an existence points estimate of over 10 million. In total, Jahil's combat power was over 4 times greater. It was only because Benimaru's technique surpassed Jahil's that he could barely maintain the battle. Without the Lord of Shimmering Flame, Benimaru would have already been defeated. Sensing Rimuru's gaze, Benimaru sent a helpless plea for support, indicating that while Rimuru seemed to be faring well, he was genuinely struggling. However, Rimuru had no excess energy to spare, and both enemies appeared quite composed. Given the circumstances, all Rimuru could do was stall for time, hoping for reinforcement from others. Thus, Rimuru decided it was best to continue observing the situation. Encouraging Benimaru to hang in there a bit longer, Rimuru's words nearly brought Benimaru to tears, as he insisted he couldn't hold out much longer. Rimuru couldn't recall the last time he heard Benimaru sound so defeated. With no better options, Rimuru quickly pondered a strategy. Let's switch perspectives for a moment. While Rimuru took on Feldway, Ranga, Kamara, and Sue each moved to support different units. They hadn't discussed this much but naturally chose their opponents based on the enemy's general strength. Ranga headed toward where Vega, the source of the most overwhelming presence, was located. Unsurprisingly, that would be the most intense battlefield. Upon seeing Vega, Ranga calmly analyzed the situation. He realized that Vega's displayed strength was greater than his own. However, Ranga only needed to buy time, trusting that once Sue and Kamara dealt with their respective foes, they would come to support him. Ranga believed in his companions and in Rimuru-sama, facing the formidable enemy without fear. Ranga let out a battle roar, positioning himself as the shield to reorganize the battle formation, and declared that reinforcements would soon arrive. He proclaimed his master Rimuru-sama's invincibility without hesitation. The subordinates of Leon, who were on the verge of being annihilated, as well as the 5 demon peers under Rain and Misery, felt a surge of hope. They quickly changed their tactics and gathered around Ranga. Seeing the scene before him, Vega was utterly speechless. He had never imagined he would end up fighting a dog. With his existence points surpassing 10 million, Vega believed himself to be invincible due to his immense power. Without thinking, he charged at Ranga with brute force, intending to crush the dog using the power of his ultimate skill, Lord of Evil Dragons. This ultimate skill was the result of Vega's continuous growth. After undergoing the Rosso family's research and Yuki's modifications, Vega had transformed into a secret entity similar to an artificial slime. Vega's body was composed of numerous tiny active cells, allowing him to fully regenerate as long as some cells remained, much like Majin Buu from Dragon Ball. Moreover, he could mimic the structure of organisms, potentially acquiring the abilities of his prey. This ability enabled him to gain the ultimate skill, Lord of Evil Dragons, after merging with a Seraphim. The essence of Lord of Evil Dragons was the absorption and assimilation of the prey's power, similar to Lord of Gluttony. It allowed Vega to read and absorb the abilities of consumed beings, mass-produce and control replicas similar to himself, and continually grow stronger through skillful usage. Yes, the key was being able to use it skillfully. Unfortunately, Vega had never accumulated such experience since birth. Despite his rapid growth, he lacked combat experience. He could only perform basic ultra-speed thought, physical enhancement, and analytical appraisal, even unable to manage parallel thought, let alone replicate and mass-produce or acquire the racial abilities of others. Consequently, with his half-baked ultimate skill, Vega's fist, imbued with vicious power, pierced through Ranga's body. However, Vega immediately sensed something was amiss. He was astonished by the light, insubstantial feeling in his hand. Although he had pierced through the dog, he didn't feel any solid resistance. There was no sense of absorbing energy, or even analyzing Ranga's attributes. This was because Ranga had perfectly mastered his ultimate skill, Lord of Star Wind. The Lord of Star Wind allowed Ranga to transform into a demonic wind that could contaminate everything it touched. This ability made him immune to all physical attacks and could inflict damage on the opponent upon contact through the death-calling wind. At this moment, Ranga was essentially magic itself. While he maintained mass to keep his form, he could also transform into countless conscious particles imbued with destructive energy, capable of dispersing and coalescing at will, making him impossible to capture. Realizing that Vega's punches were ineffective, Ranga was surprised by Vega's straightforward attacks. Despite Vega's existence points being far superior, Ranga, influenced by his master Rimura-sama, approached everything with caution and wondered if Vega's attack was a trap. Unable to hit Ranga, Vega grew increasingly agitated, shouting that a mere dog dared to underestimate him. Observing Vega's frustrated demeanor, Ranga realized that his opponent wasn't employing any cunning tactics. He was simply an idiot. Mindlessly attacking Ranga, who had transformed into demonic wind, Vega's actions were akin to self-harm. The correct approach would have been to infuse his own powers into his fists, using an ultimate skill to counter another ultimate skill. However, Vega hadn't considered this at all. Ranga was initially surprised by Vega's stupidity, and then felt a bit annoyed. He had thought Vega was trying to deceive him, but it turned out Vega was truly an idiot. Faced with such a fool, Ranga decided to finish him off in one decisive strike. Ranga began running seriously, his speed increasing rapidly, his figure transforming into countless afterimages that filled the space around Vega. Soon, a humming sound filled the enclosed space, a cataclysmic force field emerged, black lightning descended from the sky, and the ultimate attack, Apocalypse Howling, was unleashed. This move, Apocalypse Howling, was Ranga's most powerful single-target attack. As a side note, if Ranga had howled like a distant bark, it could have been projected like a laser, but to cause greater damage, he chose to release it within a confined space this time. Vega, who took the direct hit, had his body almost completely obliterated. Yet he didn't die. As previously mentioned, as long as there were any cells left, he could fully regenerate. Though not unscathed, the Lord of Evil Dragons helped him reconstruct his body. Vega's vast magical reserves were not just for show. Roaring in fury, Vega fell into a frenzy, glaring fiercely at Ranga. Then, calming down, he admitted that continuous battles had worn him out and declared today a draw, warning that he wouldn't show Ranga any mercy next time. Although reckless, Vega surprisingly was a coward inside. Realizing the unfavorable situation, Vega decided to retreat. Ranga had no objection to this. the fact that his strongest attack hadn't killed Vega indicated that Vega's strength far exceeded his own. It was only because Vega was an idiot who couldn't properly use his skills that Ranga had managed to temporarily suppress him. And so, the most intense battle came to an end. As everyone rejoiced over Ranga's victory, one of Rain's subordinates, Mizora, fell into deep thought. Mizora couldn't believe that Rimuru-sama's pet was so powerful. From Mizora's perspective, Ranga's existence points were far below Vega's, yet Ranga had still achieved an overwhelming victory. Mizora remembered what her master, Rain, had once told her: there were incredibly powerful beings in the world, and watching Rimuru-sama would help her understand her own insignificance. Filled with admiration and awe for Rimuru-sama, Mizora marveled at how even his pet was so formidable, wondering just how terrifying his master must be. The other 4 demon peers were clearly thinking the same thing, all filled with admiration for Rimuru-sama. Moreover, Leon's subordinate, the nearly depleted White Knight, Maytel, was equally astounded by Ranga's strength. Seeing how reliable Ranga was, Maytel decided to buy a dog as a pet after the battle. Indeed, Maytel later got herself a dog and named it Ranga II. Dogs quickly became the most popular pets in Golden City El Dorado. Alright, that's all for this video. In our next episode, we will look at the battles involving Sue and Kamara, as well as how Rimuru uses his words to repel Feldway. The next episode will be equally exciting and interesting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.